welcome to Amer's podcast. My name is Amer, of course, and with me today are Peet Sneekes and Ron Kersic. Hey, Ron and Peet, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Uh, it's
Then
been
I'm
a
gonna
while
be
since
great as well.
it's been a while since we've
Moderate.
seen each other. Yes, we for the people that don't know, I had a podcast before this, and both Ron and Peet were separately guests of the podcast. But I just enjoy talking to them on all kinds of different topics. But before we go into that, maybe we can do a bit of an introduction of yourself so people know who I'm talking to. Pete, let's start off with you.
Sure. I'm Peet Sneekes. I'm creative strategist and enterprise designer. My background is technical with product design and software development in my past. These days, I'm interested in ways to make people a little bit more curious, think outside the set ways to be innovative and be innovative rather than acting as such. And yeah, as a side project, I am also very interested in how governments work and how we perceive AI and ethics and all kinds of boundary stuff around it, which I try to like knit together into cohesive story.
All right. And Ron?
Well, I think the shortest way to introduce myself is to say that I'm a recovering programmer, which is totally true. Somewhat longer description is that I practice a craft I sneakily call futuring architectures. For one, because it sounds really pretentious, but also because it actually gets what I'm really passionate about. And I desperately need to understand technology and what it does to people and society, and to whom it does what it does, and for whom it actually should be doing what it does. And from that understanding, I certainly make an effort to mobilize organizations to start fitting into that, well, that future landscape technology is painting.
That's an amazing description of what you do. I know that it is kind of like the kind of intersection of technology, people, and how we work and those kind of things. That's definitely what I
Yeah,
see coming back.
yeah. And of course, to hijack this podcast from the start, I mean, I actually think this is the way it should be. I think this is the state of technology. It cannot be just technology. It has to include people. It has to include communities and organization. And in the end, it comes down to us, technologists, right? Noblesse oblige. I think we have a very strong obligation, self-imposed obligation in my case, to get this across to people who are not like us, who have not our queer hobbies, right? Who have not our weird past and growing up with a Sinclair Spectrum, etc. So normal people, in short.
Yeah, and if I look at some of the organizations I've worked in, but also worked for, you can see that, right? Whenever there's a big, for example, a modernization project or whatever, what you see usually is that, sure, technically, sometimes these are very complicated things to do, but usually that's not the most complicated thing in the whole thing. The most complicated thing is getting everybody in the same kind of direction and moving towards the same point. That's what I've seen, at least from some of my experiences. Pate, what's your kind of view on this?
Yeah, to me, it's all about the fundamentals, right? And taking time to do so. I found in the times of COVID that we kind of forgot about how to understand each other and how to create a mutual shared understanding of how we see the world. And specifically, like Ron just said, we do have a responsibility to translate how we see the world towards other people, but also vice versa. There are all kinds of different disciplines that do all kinds of assumptions on what they hold to be true, and I think the true craft is into making sure that everybody sees the objectives, but also the challenges ahead in a way that other people can be um, participant on. You know, that they can think with you rather than try to make sense of you.
Yeah, and one thing that when we were discussing like the potential topics, because like I said just before we started, we had a little bit of a conversation. I told people like if I get together with Pete and Ron, there's not a like a set agenda. We're gonna start talking about stuff and see where we end up. And usually those are kind of the discussions I like to do most. But we did discuss a few topics. One of them was something that you sent to us, Ron, and I think was a kind of good read for anybody that is in engineering and working inside of an organization. It's called Egoless Engineering, and I think it's a talk, right, Ron, that someone did at a particular, it's probably a conference or something like that. Um, and I kind of the TLDR of this whole thing was um, when you look at organizations as they evolve, and especially engineering organizations, you see that people go into specializations and we try to kind of divide up responsibilities between people. And what it kind of says is like, okay, let's move all this to the side and see it as one thing that everybody owns. And the instead of cutting it up, because some of the examples that were in there were also functions that were created where everybody was like, what is this function actually? Like, what does it actually do? I think there was like something about a release manager or something like that. And
Yeah.
nobody really knew what they were doing, what it was. But it came about because the splitting was going on between things. And I wanted to ask first you, Ron, because you brought up the topic. What was kind of your kind of insights from this? Was this uh, we need to do things differently as well, or what
Yeah.
was the whole thing?
Oh, yeah, it's a couple of things. Um, a phrase I use often in my work life is it depends, right? So I always come with two aspects to a thing. No, I think for one thing, you mentioned the word complicated just earlier, Amer. I actually think we are living in complex times, right? And complex is not complicated squared or something. It's something very, very, very different. That means that the outcome isn't known upfront and can't be known upfront. Not because we're stupid, because, well, it's complex, right? And even the path to a outcome emerges as we go. And increasingly I see that organizations, as almost like organisms, are inherently complex, certainly today. And we live in organizations, certainly I do, in organizations based on the structure of the World War II American defense companies. Literally, right? So the American War Department in World War II, they were funding all these programs to actually, beat their enemies. And that wasn't going well in the beginning, right? So things had to be optimized. So they created this program called Think with Industry, right? And they had three big sub-programs in there. One is how to do R&D. Actually, R&D was kind of coined in that time. How to do HR, how to attract and retain your workers, right? And then in the end, what was the third one? How to do innovation at an industrial scale, right? And we literally inherit our organizational forms, typically, right, from that period and time and age, right? Making a bomber plane, which is a complicated thing, at a frightful scale, right? I mean, if you see some of the pictures at the end of the World War, I mean, how Ford was building B-24 bombers. I mean, you see this huge factory, right? A factory that has clouds in it. It was that big. And all the way to the horizon that you can just see hazily just these massive 4-engine bombers, right? I mean, that's the organization we, us, the audience, live in, right? And that's not an organization that's fit for the current day and age. Because, and that's the second aspect, if you look at digital technology, well, digital, right? It has a couple of really interesting aspects. For one is that once you have digitized something, to start using it is frightfully easy, right? The transaction cost, as an economist would say, are kind of close to zero. I mean, just take this podcast, right? I'm looking at a screen with three people, one of them is mine, trying not to look at myself, right? And all it did to actually schedule this meeting was send an invite, right? And all we needed to actually start participating in this session is click on a link. Yeah, click a couple of buttons, right? And that's it, right? That's zero effort. And the other thing is massive scale, right? Once something is digital, you pretty much, your audience is the 5 billion people connected to the internet. Yes, some countries have firewalls, etc. But basically, everyone with a smartphone on this wonderful planet could, and I actually think should, watch this podcast. Right, to close to zero cost, right? It's not like a massive endeavor. And that's a long way to get to the fact that if something is digital, it wants to be open, it wants to be free, it wants to be used by each and anyone in ways that you, the creator, didn't envision, and worse, in ways that you, the creator, can't control anyways. Right, so, and that makes things so complicated, so complex. See, I also made that mistake, and that's why you just see that the organizational forms you have, these specialized management function. By the way, management is also an invention, right, from the industrial age. Not riffing on managers or whatsoever, but still, and it just doesn't fit anymore, right? And this, and of course, egoless sounds great, but I actually think it also could have been holistic, right? Being the holistic engineer, look at the system, stand back. What's the problem? For who are we solving this for? Is this the entity to solve this for? Are there other parties we actually should be addressing? But if it is this one, are we doing the right way? So step back. And it has to be inherently collaborative, and not because that sounds wishy-washy. That's not because we're postmodern hippies. I'm wearing a postmodern hippie shirt, right? It's because it's inherent in the matter. So that's what triggered my attention, and that's what triggered my desire to share it with you.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a rant. But I
No,
think
what
that's the state of affairs. We have organizations not fit anymore for the challenges these organizations are facing, and the customers they are serving, and the communities they are serving are facing.
Peet,
Not
what's your
much of a
view on this?
TLDR, but so that's the DR, Ben, right? or the TL, I mean.
Yeah.
Too long, too long.
Too
Yeah,
long.
too
No,
long,
no,
too
no.
long, too long,
I,
for sure.
I love it because it shows like the background, right? Why this happened, right? Why did we come to this kind of point where people need to write this actually, that
Yeah.
this is a thing.
And to me, it's like those old models, although they were very valuable in the past, like years and years before. Let's say before digital. I think digital might be like the seesaw moment where we could see like, okay, we probably need new models, new ways of organizing ourselves. And funny enough, you see such notions also appear in industries where new material also was evident, and new ways of collaboration was also necessary to do so. So, for example, architecture is a really nice example for that. People started thinking from building houses and being very aesthetic and being very functional. They started thinking about what function they need to have in life, towards society, towards the future, as being, they found out buildings stand a long time. So how can we make sure the building is not set in its way on itself, but can be like multifunctional towards the future, or can be changed after the fact? And I really like, I just saw like this documentary about, oh man, what was this called? Metabolism. I'm not sure if you're familiar. If you're not, please look it up on YouTube and just gobble up some of the videos about that. And specifically Kenzo Tenji or Tange. He led like an MIT studio and really figured out what it should be. And in this case, it's about how architecture can be seen as an organism, how you facilitate growth, how it needs to be flexible rather than just grow and grow and grow. No. It also needs to be capable of shrinking back when necessity asks that. But you also start thinking about, rather than just the structures, you also start thinking about the filaments, the things that connect all the elements. You start thinking about nourishment and how to be cognizant of how, like, the architecture is being used, so you can change, so you are aware of how to change accordingly. So I think that might be like the notions that we need to operate. But I think the biggest hurdle for us right now is that we've been kind of like addicted, or let's say used to the way we organize ourselves. We kind of like feel like, okay, this feels very comfortable, right? Everybody that has the function of HR agent or recruiter or software developer, and even they know what to do because it's been described like in the past, and so
Yeah.
it's set. And I
And we're
think,
educated like this, right?
yeah, and
Mm.
I think the people don't dare to challenge that that you can do without those people, or that you can disperse those functions
Yeah.
into many people.
But that's the what is water meme, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume people know this, but if they don't, there is this great, it's almost like a poem, I believe, right? But there is this story, right, that two young fish are swimming in the water, right? And then an older fish comes by and says, "Hey guys, how is the water?" And the two young fish turn to each other and say, "What is water?" Right, and
Because
it
they're in
totally
water.
makes sense. I mean, why
Yeah,
would you actually distinguish water? Because it's everywhere, and of course it's there,
it's
right? Until it
self-evident.
isn't, of course.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing. We have all these structures and all these assumptions. Of course, you're going to have management, and of course, you're going to have HR, and of course, you're going to have this and that. And it's the, I mean, I'm lucky enough to get interns in my little team, which tend to be, well, quite a bit younger than I am, even than you are. But it's amazing to actually see how they're being brought up with assumptions I think don't hold up anymore.
Mm.
Assumptions about work, assumptions about career,
Yeah.
assumptions about the office, assumptions about how to behave and dress at the office. And that's all ingrained from early age. Look at education. I mean, that's one of my favorite rants. We educate people based on their date of production, right? You're sitting in a classroom with people more or less of your age, and that continues just for like 20 years, right? I mean, does that make sense? I mean, but that's the way we do things around here, right? And that's very difficult to unsee. So I totally get it when the kind of rants I'm now venting here fall on deaf ears, and people say, "What is he talking about?" And leave me alone. I have a job to do. I totally get that. I mean, there is no anchor from my side, but that just makes the mission of people who do get it more stronger. And that's what I said earlier. I think there is a group of people who fundamentally get technology. I'm pretty sure both of you, I'm now looking at the screen, right? When you first saw ChatGPT or GPT, or maybe even the Transformer paper, if you're really ahead of the curve, right? You kind of understood what it did and how it did and what it doesn't do, right? Almost
Yes.
intuitively. A bit of reading, a bit of thinking, yeah, this is what it is. And then if you see how it is being portrayed in media, I mean, it's night and day. Because to most people, and I don't mean this in a cynical way, it's like magic. And if something is magic, you don't know what the boundaries are, right? Because it's magic, then it means I can do anything, right? And somebody needs to get a story across. No, 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 no. What it actually is this,
Yeah.
right? And I
Mm.
think that group of people is us. Not only the three of us, but our profession. I strongly believe that. Noblesse oblige. I'm going to probably use that phrase quite a bit in this podcast.
Yeah. From my side, to the organizations piece, what I find interesting is that when I started, there was sure there were kind of like roles and those kind of things, but they were much less defined than they are right now. Like for example, if you look at front end and back end, right?
Yeah.
Those kind of things. People were doing kind of both, right? They were just like,
Yeah.
I'm a software engineer. Like I build software. If that's
Yeah.
front end, back end, doesn't matter, right? Um, somewhere along the way, we kind of saw that gets split, and some do just front end, some do just back end, and it also comes with like the complexity of how frameworks have evolved and more languages and those kind of things. So there is some piece of that. But what I also see is like a bit of a trend, and I've seen this on LinkedIn popping up every once in a while, of companies saying like, yeah, all these roles and all these levels that we have within the roles and those kind of things, they're all kind of like BS, right? We want to make it easier for people to understand what they're doing and not be so defined that you're in like a small box and that's what you're doing, right? That nothing else. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's a, I think that's a one. On the one hand, it's a good trend. On the other hand, is especially if when you look at the education system, uh, you work towards something when you're in college or whatever you're doing, and yeah, you come out of it thinking like I'm gonna be X, and I'm gonna be a front end engineer, I'm gonna be a back end engineer, whatever. Um, if you now strip away that and say like, yeah, you're just an engineer, uh, it might be too ambiguous for people to understand when
Oh.
they come in. So um, those are those are some trends that I see. It's like we had this before where you were like a software engineer and that's it. We went to back end, front end, those kind of things split, and now people are trying to get back to that,
Yeah.
like trying to get back to that old system. Is it something that you see as well?
I kind of like see education answering the question of commerce,
Mm.
basically of the companies. It's like, oh, we're hiring front end developers,
Yes.
and then the education tries to answer that as such. From my point of view, I grew up as a software engineer, but I really like I specifically like the answer a former colleague of mine gave when I asked her what kind of education she enjoyed at before her first job. And she said she was an industrial designer. I said, "Oh, that's curious because now you're a developer." And she said, "Well, that's not how I see it. I see my craft as being an industrial designer, and in
Mm.
this case, I chose the material of code." And I found that very interesting. You know, that's an interesting insight to have, an interesting perspective to have. But I'm pretty sure not everybody sees it like that. Some people just want to be a thing, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate um, education giving people like a starting point for their career, and not per se dictating it as being the end of the line, right? Once you're a front end developer, it doesn't mean you can't be a back end developer or an AI specialist or a psychologist. It just
Mm.
means, okay, this is where you start. This is how you experience your first job, I guess.
Mm.
And I think that's okay. But the expectation of students and the expectation of companies is different. Students
Mm.
really see that as this is what I'm going to be, because that's also kind of the message that they're getting, and companies say this is the product that we're going to get, and this is something we can rely on. And I think that's kind of like a false premise for both parties. I think they need to be informed that from that point on, basically your life and your career is very malleable,
Mm.
depending
It
on what.
feels limiting if you do it the
Yeah,
way it's
indeed.
being done.
Yeah, and some
Yeah.
people really like certainty, right? So, and this really depends on the kind of person you are, and also on what kind of path you're on, and what kind of things you find interesting.
Mm.
But for me, it's I really had to work hard on doing away with like the stigma of being a technical guy. It
Mm.
was really hard to become a designer from my point of view.
Yeah. But I actually think, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, so the arc of the past, I think, is clear, right? This is just industrialization. What you
Yeah.
described, Amer, this is industrialization, right? I mean, indeed, when I started programming, we didn't call it software engineering then, just programming. I mean, people had no idea what it actually is that I could do, or what my craft is. They just needed software, and somehow magically I brought the software to them in a certain fashion, and that's okay, right? But then things get industrialized, and that's an industrialization at scale is always specialization. and componentization and modularization, and that's why you get these. But I think going forward, I really wonder whether the pendulum won't be swinging back, right? Because the reason why I paused and the reason why I smiled is because I actually made a vow not mentioning generative AI.
We talked about this before, but
Failing.
here we go.
Failing.
No, but I mean, if the promise or the potential, as I see it in generative AI, actually pans out, right? I mean, then a certain activity becomes, to do a certain activity sufficiently well, becomes much more easy, right? I mean, at some point, taking software engineering as a point, more people than now can start crafting sufficiently capable software. As good as a specialized so-called 10x developer? No. But do we need them all the time, everywhere? No, also. Right? So, and if you have tooling that can help you create in a certain domain something that's sufficiently applicable, what's left for you then? What do you bring to the table? It's not skill. It's not how to operate the machine and how to know which buttons to press in what order, right? Or how to dress or how to act in the office. It's, I think what's then left is taste or personality, whatever you want to call it, right? Your judgment, your ability to not only do things right, that's what the machine does, but to decide what's the right thing to do. And if actually, and that's the tasting, what is right? What's actually the applicable thing here? So I think this almost has to be, at least for the next 2 decades, a push back to being much more judged on an individual basis, on a taste basis. I mean, my whole career, in air quotes, in the mid-90s as a programmer was based on my reputation. Nobody hired me because I went to the Eindhoven University of Technology and graduated in computer graphics. I mean, people just got me because of my, in the end, vibe.
Yeah.
For right or wrong. I mean, some people didn't hire me for my vibe, right? And some people actually did. And back then, I was not a commoditized worker.
That's
right?
that's an interesting word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
And I
specifically
think,
the commodity. People expect scale from people, which is the
yeah,
weirdest thing ever.
interchangeably, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
just get me a front-end developer, get me
Yeah.
XYZ, and that's
Yeah.
and I totally get that in an industry. I mean, if everything is standardized and modularized, and if we know how right looks like, totally, right? I mean, that's the factory mindset. We know how the assembly line works. We know which screws have to be put in what order at what station of the assembly line. And then, indeed, people become, a la Charlie Chaplin in modern times, right, literally cogs in the machine. But if this is a much more complex situation where right isn't clear yet and the path to get is much more emergent, this cannot work. There is no physics to actually govern the solution. There is no assembly line yet. And then you need to get back to, well, people and their vibe, their taste, and their ability to collaborate with other people. And again, that's the egoless aspect again. The ability to get out of the office, reach out, and just listen to other people without judgment yet, right? And just try to understand what it takes for both of you to collaborate towards a sufficiently shared goal. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
one,
what
one
he
thing
said.
one thing that's interesting this thing, yes, we said we're not going to talk about generative AI, but I think you cannot get away from it in this kind of
No.
setting. But one thing I agree with the notion of it's going to be able to at least do sufficiently good enough software to create the products and those kind of things. You already see that there's a lot of people that that are creating things that can generate just apps out of, yeah, almost out of thin air, you would say, but it's a little bit more complex than that. Complex is the word of this podcast, by the way. It's true. But what is cool about it is that it gives it to a lot of people, but it also is kind of the pitfall, if you will, there as well, because do you really understand what's going on inside of your project or your product or whatever you're creating, right? I think that's where people that have a software engineering background or an engineering background have a little bit of a one up on people that don't have that, right? If something goes wrong, if there's a bug or whatever, right? Sure, generative AI will be able to see those kind of things, but I think it takes a little bit more than that to get to a point where you can actually say, okay, I know what this product does, I know how it works, and those kind of things. I'll give you an example. I'm not a software engineer by trade. I more from the infrastructure side of things. But if I if I generate something with Claude, for example, or ChatGPT, like an app, or I see a lot of like front end code, and I'm like, I can kind of figure out what it is, right? I can figure out, but do I understand it as good as someone that does this as a day job? No, probably not. So, um, what's your view on that particular pitfall? Like, is that something that is going to be solved by just the way these models are evolving and those kind of things, or is it something that will always require someone to have some knowledge of what they're doing?
Yeah, I think the word that you're looking for is responsibility.
Hmm.
I mean, taking responsibility of how something works is something like similar to taste, or perhaps in as an extension to taste. Taking responsibility is also for the choices, for how things work and how either sloppy or precise you want to work. Is very much the aspect we expect of people, right?
Hmm.
And developing tools to make sure you can take responsibility. Those things are at the moment very much in development for AI and AGI, etc. I see a lot of generation of things. Like Ron and I, we also have a podcast. It's just a model, and we talk a lot about that AI is nostalgia in, nostalgia out. So we kind of can predict of what kind of stuff comes out of AI, which is things that we thought up first, or things that AI might have seen in like in other repositories of data. But truly using like AI and AI kind of behavior to use, for example, for discovery, I've seen little of that,
Hmm.
like discovering new things. The one thing I really like, for example, that does that is the folding. I'm sorry, I don't know what the word is. Like it's a medical application of AI.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's called folding. Yes,
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
yeah,
with
folding
protein
cells,
folding.
proteins. It's folding
Yeah,
proteins, and
folding proteins.
basically,
Yes.
which is very, very, very intensive. And what we found out is that the machine learning per se isn't creative enough, or let's say, quote unquote, creative enough to find random combinations. And we found out by some people would call it hallucination. I would intentional dreaming is perhaps a better word.
Yeah.
We found out AI is really well equipped to intentionally dream about scenarios that might or might not work, and finding whether or not those things might actually be applicable in the real world. And I think that might be an interesting property of how AI works that might be more valuable than how we use it at the moment.
Hmm.
yeah, and on the software front, I mean, totally what you described is totally right, right? I mean, I really don't want, let's say, the software in my car to be written by
That will be interesting.
but yeah, I mean, I mean, because the cost or the impact of failure is is life threatening, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
but there are so many cases where if software isn't scalable enough or even failed and you just reboot it, it's totally acceptable. I mean, there are so many one-off little projects that we know don't do because software is still freakishly expensive. So, for instance, can't show you because it's still work in progress, but this morning I started using Claude, making my own little habit tracker, right? I have a couple of habits. Well, you see, beginning of the new year, And what you want to see how much I mean, and I could code it from scratch, but is that worth my time and attention? And I need to learn this framework. Just generate the damn thing, right? And if it breaks at some time, well, I fix it then. And if it breaks, well, you know what? Maybe I'm not even tracking my habits then. So the opportunity cost, now going to sound really smart, the opportunity cost is higher than the actual impact cost, right? I mean, if it fails down the line, I think that's less worse than me not doing it now. And there are so many things in software that people have a great idea and they don't do because they don't know how to get started. They don't know how to communicate it to somebody who could do it, or even they don't know how to talk to somebody who could do it, software engineer, right? I mean, it's all these things that are not happening because the people with the great idea, the taste, don't know how to. And I mean, if they just could make a prototype, right? This is kind of what I was thinking of. I think that in itself would be really valuable. And yes, I mean the actual software engineering, right? And crafting software in an engineering like fashion, that won't go away. I mean, absolutely not. But the pie will expand. It just has to expand.
Yeah.
Which then also means that as a professional engineer, you will get in touch with people who are not. And again, that's the egoless aspect again, right? That's the aspect to actually understand with people who are not you, to reach out, to listen, and to try and find a way to collaborate.
And that might be very fruitful, right? I mean, being kind of like forced to connect with those people might be like create a broadened horizon for people, a better perspective of what might be interesting and important.
Yeah, and a broader perspective for all parties,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Me and them, and it goes both ways.
Yeah, that might be the skill also that needs to grow, right? The ability to play amongst each other, to discover and practice, finding new stuff or creating stuff together.
Yeah,
And the ideation part and the prototyping part, I can see, right? Because that's whenever I need to do something, be it create a script or something like that. Nowadays, I'm like, okay, let's try and do this with some sort of developer tool, whatever that can generate it. Because me figuring out what the right kind of small thing is that I need to tweak inside of a script, not really worth like me spending an hour or two on. Like I'll give you an example. I created a script just before I went on holiday, and it was actually not that complicated, but it was getting some events from Outlook, like from my Outlook calendar, and filtering on particular things. And it needed to be written in kind of like Apple script, right? Because it's I was like, I don't know Apple script, nor do I want to start learning this. So I just asked, and it gave me a script that actually worked quite well for this particular case that I wanted to do. So instead of me trying to figure this out for a whole day, I was there for like 20, 30 minutes. I got the script that I wanted.
Yeah, and this example actually, I think I'm going to retract a bit on my statement. It's because I mean, the arc of, well, I guess, engineering in general, but certainly software engineering is one of increasing abstraction, right? I actually started programming, well, first in BASIC, and then in Motorola 6502 assembly, right? And then I went to the 68K assembly, and then to the Intel assembly, and I stopped programming in assembler when the first Pentium Pro came out, because that was the first Super Scala processor that actually had two pipelines, and all the housekeeping was just too much. I needed a machine for that one called a compiler, right? So it's the. I'm pretty sure that I'm not sure who the audience of this podcast is, but if there is engineers/programmers in there, I bet you less than 10% knows how to program in assembly.
And nobody wants to either anymore.
And there it is. Because you don't have to anymore, right? Because we have an abstraction called a programming language. I mean, how many programmers still work with allocating and deallocating memory, right? In C, for instance, like I also did for a decade or so, right? I mean, it's the so it's gradually abstraction, and maybe we're getting to a point where just language, English language talking to a machine in language is the interface. And maybe we have doing things wrong for the past 60 years in software, right? If you take a Turing machine, right? It's basic operation. Those are not the building blocks the way we think about solutions and implement solutions, right? We don't talk about memory locations that get written with a variable, and we read from an infinite tape and we write to an infinite tape, right? That's a very mechanistic, literally mechanistic way of thinking about composing problems and getting to their solution, right? And then we had programming language that fit that metaphor. Assignment, reputation, and selection. That's typically the three building blocks of your procedural programming language. Maybe that's a really bad way to actually solve problems people have. Maybe the reason why all these software projects typically fail, right? And the failure rate in our industry is astronomically high. Right? We make fun of Boeing nowadays, but if Boeing would have the track record of software engineering, I think crossing the ocean by ship would still be a viable business, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we have been playing with a metaphor that's wrong all along. Maybe the proper metaphor is actually talk and interact and have a conversation with people and the machine listening in. Could very well be. Could very well be that. Let's hope I still have 30 years on this wonderful planet. Looking back, that we said, what were we thinking in the 20th century? Coding programs like that could very well be.
Yeah.
It's a bit farther out, right? It won't happen next year. Won't happen maybe even this decade, but who knows? Maybe we have been wrong all along. Kind of love that, to be wrong all along. It's fantastic.
Yeah, but perhaps, but it also took us here. So I think it's also
Oh yeah, sure,
right.
sure. Yeah.
I kind of appreciate that as well. I just
Yeah,
need.
well,
I just thought like this interesting way of explaining software. Some people say, well, you can't build the plane while flying it. That most people would say that's an impossible thing to do. And I think that those people don't know how digital work.
Yeah,
Because digital is such a medium that it is possible to both fly the plane and build it at the same time, and even change like the fluids that you fly in. You can change all those things, and in particular that notion that things are way more flexible than the physical world. Is to me is like something that really needs to be discovered still.
Yeah, I totally agree. Appreciate it. And to be honest, the same thing with generative AI, right? One thing that was really depressing when ChatGPT came along, and later on Copilot, is I spent a decade of my life writing code generators, right? And then this thing comes along, and it wrote better code than any of my code generators ever could. And my code generators knew the domain, right? Abstract syntax trees, grammar, semantics, all that kind of stuff. This thing just generates plausible text, plausible based on, observations of training material, right? Doesn't know anything about programming, doesn't know anything about a problem domain or what an if statement is or what a syntax for a for loop is, right? It just knows what is plausible, and it's better. Another example, I love, because I'm a child of the 80s, I love playing text adventures, Zork, that kind of stuff, right? And in those games, you just type in a text and you travel to a world and solve puzzles, right? And one of the things you always had to conquer is understanding the parser and its limitations, right? Because certain phrases wouldn't work, and if you do it differently, it actually would, right? It's the... And now you have a parser that understands everything. Whatever I say, it seems to understand it, right? It never says, oh, a grammar error, right? Or does not compute.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know what this is. I mean, that's also the hallucination aspect, right? And even if it doesn't know, it gives you an answer. But it's amazing to see. I mean, use Alexa versus ChatGPT, right? Or these kind of things, right? I mean, how often does the damn thing not understand what you're saying? And
Yeah.
now you have technology that seemingly always gets you. So again, I think appreciating that there is something really novel in this new technology, in this so novel that it's actually a different paradigm,
Yeah.
right? And if there's a different paradigm, then things shift. And that is what we need to appreciate
Yeah.
over the next years. And we're still not.
Yeah, and even with all that, and I think many people that do understand what's kind of below all of this, we kind of see that there is some hype behind it. We cannot get out of the
Masterful.
way of that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a lot of hype behind it, and everybody that's building a product is now thinking about how can we implement it and those kind of things. I remember I remember talking to Tim Nolet, who you probably both of you
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
also know. He founded Checkly, which is a monitoring tool, and um, he also said like we were looking into it, like what could be an application for us for our product to, and he was like, yeah, there is none yet, so I'm not going to implement it,
Yeah.
right? But that's actually very contrary to a lot of products nowadays. Everybody's trying to somehow figure out how they can build it in instead of thinking about, okay, does this actually add something to my product?
Well, it
And
adds money, right? I mean, that's
in some of
how
these
it
startups,
works.
yes,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
nowadays you have Word and you have Teams with AI, and
Yeah.
of course it can also suggest like something that you can say, or it can check your application or something like that, and it's
mm,
probably fine. But
Yeah. I mean,
seriously, it's not necessary. It doesn't intrinsically heighten
no.
the value of that product at all. It probably even decreases it, or the usability of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
do
mean,
like it when it's in like the IDEs and stuff, right? When it's integrated there, because you can see that, for example, it can analyze things, it can give you optimization things that you can do. There are applications where I feel like it does add a lot of value,
oh,
but there is also because of the hype, people just trying to build it in just for the sake of having it,
Yeah.
right? That's the thing.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think in terms of productivity, it's totally fine. I
Mm,
mean, statistically, it's more likely that other people have done your job better than you can do. So why
yeah,
not use it through a wonderful interface that talks to you, right?
yeah.
But to me, creativity is AI stifles creativity to me. I mean, it can be a really nice check. If AI thinks of it, it already exists. So it's probably something I need to work on my work.
mm,
Yeah, I'm inclined to say, I mean, it stifles creativity because it's seen as a productivity tool because
Yeah,
all tools need to be productive.
yeah, it's
I'm
built as
actually inclined,
such. True.
I'm
Yeah,
actually inclined to say this is the first time I have a creative computer. I can
mm,
get the damn thing to say anything. I mean, hallucinations, right? I mean, it's presented as something bad, and I totally get it if it has to be productive, right? But it's fantastic if the thing just makes things up. Oh, never thought about this one, right?
yeah,
And
mm,
you can riff on this one, and it's the but also the loudest people now selling generative AI are oddly enough the same people selling the metaverse 2 years ago, which oddly enough are the same people shilling Web3 4 years ago, right? I
yep,
mean, that's the, and there is also the thing, it's called Amara's law. Um, we always overestimate the impact of technology on in the period of 2 years, and we vastly underestimate the impact in 2 years, 10 years, or 20
yeah,
years.
makes
And that's
sense.
what I meant with the paradigm shift. I mean, this is only just starting, and I can only now see the outskirts of a future that will be in 2 decades to come.
yeah.
And most people really don't care about what's going to happen in 20 years. That's totally fine. I totally get it.
But you
And
can, but you
actually, it's
can.
probably a luxury that I have that I actually can spend time thinking on how will life look like in 20 years. I totally
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, and it's also kind of the luxury that we share as being of a certain age,
Mm.
right? It's
Yeah,
it's
true.
like we've learned that over the time of 20 years, certain things it'll be all right. You have
Yeah,
the hype cycle. You
yeah,
know, it's a necessary step for us to disqualify the technology and then reinvent it or rediscover it and use it
yeah,
as in a way that it might be either novel or being like or ethical or the right way. I don't know, but it's a necessary step for society in this case, but also product managers and
yeah.
developers
I mean,
to discover.
we can remember the day and age when just having a .com domain made you a valuable startup.
Yeah,
Literally
I
that, just having the domain.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I used
I
a
mean,
fax machine to claim my first NL domain.
Faxes were used very often for domain name registration. Yes, that's
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a thing of
fantastic.
the past, fortunately now. But yeah, so we're coming up until the end of our time because I know that we can go on for hours with this. Like
Yep.
I know we can, uh, but I do want to ask you one more question before I let you go. And that's the question I always ask at the end. If you would have to nominate someone for our next podcast guest, who would that be? Ron, let's start off with you.
No, let's do Pete first because I have
And
Okay.
two and maybe they overlap with one of Pete.
Go for
okay,
it, Pete.
okay, so at this moment, I'm very much interested in government, and I think government needs to learn a lot of things about digital and how digital, and the nature of digital, like we discussed in this wonderful conversation. And I know a couple of people that actually um, try to bring that notion towards leadership in government. And one of the movements that I've also adhered to is Recode Government, or in Dutch it's called herprogrammeer de overheid.
Yep.
And leadership in that community is very interesting to talk to see what kind of things they come across within government that might be very telling to seeing what kind of barriers we are up to, right? And I think government might be a very nice exponent to do so. So I can't give you straight names, but I think if you discover like leadership within those communities, there will be very interesting people to talk to.
Have a look at that because I am interested in like you see all these kind of news articles about government doing some projects and those kind of things and them failing spectacularly. So those kind of things always interest me. Why that happens, right? So it's
Yeah, I mean, I can talk. I've done a little research about that, so I can talk
yeah,
about that endlessly as well. But
yeah,
it's really interesting because it's mostly people. It has nothing to do with technology. And it has a lot to do with the fascinations of Ron and myself. It's like being stuck in a model and not being able to see that or not
yeah,
seeing a way out. Yeah.
yeah. Ron,
Only one?
you can do two.
I actually have three. It's
You do three.
no, because you mentioned Tim just
Oh yeah,
earlier. I think for sure he has a fantastic story to tell.
Yeah.
he's been on my list. Yes, I
Yeah,
still need to reach
fantastic.
out to him, but he is
It's the
definitely on my list.
okay. Then this morning I also read again a nice rant by Sander Hogendoorn. Sander is lovingly opinionated, but he can back that up with a massive amount of experience. So that's a nice one. And the third one, and I really enjoy the newsletter by Iskander Smith.
Oh yeah, I
See,
concur. Yeah,
see, it's the I
definitely.
think I mean if our story resonates with the audience, right? Based on the feedback, that for one, that means we need to come back for a second part, right?
Hey, part two is always on the table for
Yeah,
me.
I mean
Yeah.
it's the. But certainly, this gentleman has a great story to tell,
Yeah.
which is a bit off the beaten path for your typical, let's say, tech head, but
I
still
love
very
that.
relevant.
I love that. Well, before I say goodbye to everybody, you mentioned it already, Pete. You have a podcast together with Ron. It's a model, and
It's just a
I
model.
it's just a model,
Yeah.
and yeah, I encourage everybody to listen to it. It's always fascinating to hear you talk about, sometimes rant about particular things
Yeah,
within tech,
we
but
love to be ranty shouty. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
I love it because it at least gives you a good opinion on a particular matter. Um, guys, thanks for your time today.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
having us. Awesome.
Everybody, until next time.
Hey.